Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. Hope you are all doing well. We are waiting for a few more people to come on. Welcome to our roundtable conversation today. I am Empress Golding, and the entire team is here, and I'm waiting on a few more people, so it soon come. Remember, we have the question and answer chat, little housekeeping before we get started. We have the question and answer tab at the bottom. Throughout this broadcast webinar, we will ask you, for those on Zoom, to type your questions in the Q&A bubble right at the bottom, and we will try our best to answer all your questions. And also in the chat, you can share your comments and thoughts and ideas about what is happening with sexual harassment in your country, in our country here in Jamaica. When sexual harassment happens, tell us what you know, what you think we should do, and it's going to be a very informative day. So thank you again for joining us, and we give thanks that we are here, an opportunity to advocate and end violence against women, children, and men by the year 2020. Let's start right now.
Police were called to the scene of another death arising from a domestic dispute.
His girlfriend
24 hours after similar
this evening after allegedly killing his wife in St. Mary's.
The Spotlight Initiative is a global multi-year partnership between the European Union and the United Nations to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls by 2030.
With a commitment of 500 million euros from the EU, Spotlight represents an unprecedented global effort and the largest of its kind to invest in gender equality and women's empowerment. Spotlight engages men and boys as equal agents of change. Engaging men and boys is a key piece of our efforts.
The objectives of Spotlight in Jamaica are to contribute to the reduction of family violence against women and girls, and to improve access for women and girls to essential, safe, adequate, integrated, gender-responsive services.
Alrighty, welcome, my people, welcome, give thanks. We have an opportunity to make things better in this world. Welcome to the first in a series of virtual roundtables on local laws that underpin the safety and protection of women and girls in Jamaica. This Roundtable number 1, dubbed When Sexual Harassment Happens, All You Need to Know, is hosted by the Spotlight Initiative, a global multi-year partnership between the European Union and the United Nations to eliminate, what did I say? Eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. I am your host, Empress Golding, and I'm honored to be in this conversation with you today. It is my honor to guide these proceedings. Today, we are joined by the UNDP resident representative, Denise E. Antonio, and Spotlight Initiative Program Coordinator in Jamaica, Novia McCain. We are also welcoming our experts at the roundtable, head of the Hugh Shearer Labor Studies Institute, UE Open Campus, Danny Roberts is with us. Also legal officer, Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports, Georgette Grant, and UN Stress Counselor, Camilla McQuinney. We are live on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. They are not here in the Zoom, but they are with us. Look at the reach. COVID-19 did something. It allowed us to have these virtual webinars where we can reach even more people and still be in our office or in our home and still advocate to make a difference and end violence against our women, our children. And I must always mention that some of our boys and men are also abused and sexually harassed. My people, please share this live feed with a friend who could use today's information using the hashtags no to sexual harassment and hashtag spotlight end violence. So we can track and we can share the information, share the knowledge, and build our advocacy team to end violence in this country and across the world. Before we dive in, we want you to tell us what you know about sexual harassment. People have many ideas of what it means, and some may not know at all. So we have a couple of scenarios that we're going to play throughout this seminar, webinar, roundtable, for you to understand or to help you to understand. So we have a pop-up poll, which is also going to happen. You will see it come up on your screen, and we would love 100% participation. We want to know what you think, how you think. This is a conversation, all-inclusive round table, so we can make a difference together. So please participate with me. I beg you, when the polls come up, we want you to answer the question, and we're going to play this first video. All right, this is a test run for the pop-up poll. Let's run the video.
Thanks again for the ride, Ken. I really appreciate it.
Sure, no problem.
What's wrong? Why aren't we going?
Well, I actually think this is a good time to talk with you away from the craziness of the office.
Okay.
You've been with us for about a month now. How do you like it?
Oh, I like it a lot. The people are great. I really appreciate getting to work from home 2 days a week.
I am glad to hear that. You're a good worker and everyone really likes you. I really like you.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're a good part of the team. And I will personally make sure that your flexible schedule continues to work for you. Oh, now you're uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Katie. That is the last thing that I want.
It's just that I don't want to get involved with anybody from work.
Understood.
Okay.
Listen, I don't want things to be weird between us. Just friends, okay? I mean, if you can't have friends at work, what's the point? Right? So let's get you home. What's your address again?
Okay. So we want to know what you think. Is this sexual harassment? The polls are up, so please let us see your responses. This is poll number 1. Is this sexual harassment? All right, come on. I want to see as many people responding as possible. Let's see. A few more people to respond. Come on. All right, I'm giving you all, let me see, 15 more seconds. Anybody else? Only 68% has voted. Come on, I want a 90% response rate. Okay, let me see. I'm giving you a few more seconds. Let's take it 10 more seconds. Anybody else? Is that sexual harassment? What you saw in that video? And in the chat, you can also tell us what you thought, where you thought the moment happened, where it could have been sexual harassment, why you think it's not sexual harassment. If you said no, I see 2 people saying no. All right, 64% of you have responded. What was that scenario? Was that a case of sexual harassment or not? And that's why we're here today, to discuss it. Deborah White is saying that seems to be going towards a hostile work environment. Come on, people, answer the polls for me. Hi, I want to say a special hello to Emma Lewis, a colleague of mine who is here. She says, when his body language changed, that was the moment when it became sexual harassment for me. Okay. All righty. All right, we are going to end the poll now. We have a 63% response rate. All right, so we're going to share the results with you. 92%, 24 of you said yes, it is sexual harassment. And 8%, 2 of the respondents said no, it's not sexual harassment. A comment here from Arlene Henry says, he has made offer to her job. He's made an offer to her job flexibility in return for, yes, a component. Danielle says a component of sexual harassment is unwanted sexual advances. So yes, it was. All right, let us give you our response. Thank you so much for participating in the poll. All right, we're gonna play a response to that video now. Where's my team? Okay, so we're not playing that response. It is sexual harassment. Whenever it is unwanted, it is considered sexual harassment. All right, we're gonna keep going. Grab a glass of water. It's gonna be an interesting day, very informative session here today. All right, thank you so much for sharing your comments in the chat. Keep it going all the way throughout because we want to capture your ideas, capture your thoughts, and capture your suggestions. It is sexual harassment because it was unwanted. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, next we are going to learn about the Spotlight Initiative in Jamaica from the program coordinator, Novia McKay. Novia is here to tell us a little bit about Spotlight and why we are here talking about the Sexual Harassment Act. We've been hearing about it in the newspaper and now we're going to do something about it starting now. So Novia, welcome.
Thank you, Empress, and welcome and thank you to all of our participants online. We know it's 12 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm sure everyone has stuff to do, so we're happy that you're joining us for this discussion today. Thank you so much, Empress, and to all the other panelists who will speak today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
All right, thank you. We're gonna go right in. You know all about the work that you're doing. You know what you need us, the citizens of Jamaica, to do, the men, the children, the women, how we can all get together right now to end violence against our women and children. So let's start with the global Spotlight Initiative, what we are doing in Jamaica, and take us through why we should be discussing the Sexual Harassment Act. Over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I think we're all clear that violence against women and girls is a problem. Those of you who were on at the beginning and would have seen the video, and if you watch the news, both locally and internationally, you'll see that we have had some truly heinous and horrific crimes against our women and our girls, from violence, even murder, sexual abuse against children, even as young as 2. And we have actually seen that increasing with COVID-19. In fact, domestic abuse is now being considered a shadow pandemic behind COVID-19 because of the restrictions. Many women and girls are cut off from outlets and from other sources of help that they would have had before. Fortunately, the Spotlight Initiative was established pre-COVID, actually, but the timing is actually great. It's excellent. As a global initiative to end violence against women and girls. Now, the interesting thing, Empress and colleagues, is that Spotlight is actually the single largest effort coalescing for this issue. It involves 25 countries worldwide. It's funded directly by the European Union, who has been a tremendous partner globally, but also for us here in Jamaica. The key for Spotlight that we're focusing on in Jamaica and in 5 other countries in the Caribbean, bigging up my Belize counterparts on the call, is family violence. Now, what the research shows us is that in our region, the main driver around domestic violence, sexual abuse against children, gender-based violence for short, is really occurring in and around the home and the community. Whereas in other countries, you might find human trafficking is the main issue. You may find female genital mutilation or child sex marriage is the issue in other countries. Here in the Caribbean, we're focusing around what goes on in and around the home primarily. Now, you may say, okay, well, how does sexual harassment come in? The fact is that our legal framework, while in Jamaica we have a strong legal framework, we really need the legislation that exists to protect and safeguard the rights of women and girls, and of course, any victims of domestic violence and child sexual abuse. But we also need the laws to act as deterrents for that behavior. So if we find that victims are experiencing this, but they don't have an avenue to pursue legal recourse, then it gives those who are abusers a greater position of power. So the Sexual Harassment Act is really only one of several laws that Jamaica has in place or is currently updating that help us to address this issue and ensure that we safeguard the rights of women and girls, and that there are protections and alternatives for them to seek recourse against their abusers.
Interesting that you even spoke to genital mutilation. It is different in other countries, and the Caribbean, as you said, family violence. Why? I know in the beginning, Novia, I mentioned boys are abused too, and I know Spotlight is putting the light on or highlighting the plight of women and girls. What role do men and boys play in this bill, in this movement to fast track this act and play our part as citizens to end violence against women and girls?
Men and boys play a very critical role, and really and truly the choice of what role men and boys play in furthering these objectives is really a stark one, because the reality is that men and in some cases boys on the negative side tend to be the primary perpetrators of gender-based violence and sexual abuse. Not the only, but the primary. So the reality is that we have to engage men and boys, because for whatever the driving reasons, it could be socialization, it could be where they were raised, it could be them having experienced it themselves, they are the main perpetrators. And to change anything, we have to work with the ones who are actually doing the things that we want to stop. So that's the first element. The second element is really seeing men as allies and supporters in furthering the work that we're trying to do. So there is a role for men to play in recognizing and understanding, for instance, what is sexual harassment? It's a tough question because, in Jamaica, we are loving, we're warm, we're open people. There's nothing like a man who wants to compliment a woman, tell her how beautiful she is, or tell her how much she appreciates her. But the reality is that we need our brothers, our fathers, our sons to understand where the line is between behavior that is appreciated and behavior that is unwanted. And so we strongly want and need to engage men as our allies in this, because the reality is that men listen to other men. Men hear what other men say. Men are role models for men. Fathers teach their sons. Friends teach each other and show them how to actually be the men that we want to be. So men and boys are a critical factor in advancing this and in understanding and changing the national conversation about what is acceptable and what is not in our workplace, in our homes, in our communities, and in our schools everywhere.
All right. What about our workplaces? What are you seeing from some of the background research? What are the challenges that women and girls are facing, especially in the workplace? And what do we need to do to help to end sexual harassment in those spaces, in particular, the workplace?
Awesome question. And I know our other panelists are going to get way more in depth in that. So my teaser would be that, in several other countries, or the US, Canada, the typical countries that we look up to, they have their workplace conversations around sexual harassment tend to be a little bit more advanced than here in Jamaica. The main thing that we're finding is that the conversation is not happening as much as it should in terms of what this really means, what is comfortable, what is acceptable, and what is not. We know that it occurs, but really and truly, we don't have great ways yet of measuring it because we haven't fully set some of the frameworks in place. Now, I know both of our colleagues, Georgette and Danny, will be able to speak a lot more to what they're seeing on the ground, but what we recognize is that there are some gaps in the legal framework, and this is why the Sexual Harassment Act is being developed, is being reviewed, so that we can close those gaps and make workplaces safer and more harmonious for our men and our women.
Thank you so much for starting things off on the right foot. Thank you for what you're doing with the Spotlight Initiative. Thank you for being in the spotlight. We're going to move it now. You know, I just get excited when I see powerful women working in these spaces to help other women and girls. I get excited. And the reason you may see me energetic about this very sad conversation of sexual harassment is because I know that we can bring the change. So thank you so much for all you're doing, Novia. All righty, so we are moving now to Denise E. Antonio. She has the UNDP multi-country office in Jamaica. She's been here since May 2019. Yes, I remember when she came. As a resident representative, she oversees the UNDP program operations in Jamaica, the Bahamas, Bermuda, Cayman Islands, and Turks and Caicos Islands. Prior to this appointment, Denise was Deputy Country Director of Operations with UNDP. Are you ready? Angola, 2015 to 2019, Zimbabwe 2011 to 2015, and Deputy Resident Representative Operations in Ghana 2006 to 2011. She's a certified public accountant in New York State and a graduate of Business Administration in Accounting from Adelphi University. She's a married mother of 5. Denise's presentation will also include insights from UNDP's own sexual harassment policy. So if you want to create a sexual harassment policy in your workplace, you may want to take notes. Denise Antonio, the spotlight is now on you.
Thank you so much, Empress. Colleagues, I'm so sorry my internet is acting a bit weird today. So I'm not going to do the video because I don't want it to stall. Let me just welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for participating in this very important event, because we really need to see how we can address the issue of sexual harassment and abuse for both men and women. And also make Jamaica a better place, right? Because that's the goal. We want to actually make Jamaica a better place. So let me first welcome the head of the Hugh Shearer Labor Studies Institute of UWI Open Campus, Danny Roberts. Welcome. The legal officer for the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sports, Georgette Grant. Of course, our own Spotlight Initiative Program coordinator, Ms. Novia McKay, and other representatives of the partner implementation agencies for UNDP and the government. Our stress counselor, Kamala McWhinney. Of course, Ms. Impress Golding, who is moderating this for us, members of the UN country team, and those who are attending and also watching live stream. Good afternoon and welcome to this lunchtime roundtable on sexual harassment. So the UNDP program, UNDP Multi-Country Office in Jamaica, is pleased to lead the implementation of this series of virtual roundtables on the legislation underpinning the protection of women and girls in Jamaica. Under the auspices, of course, we know of the EU, they have been able to fund this not only in Jamaica, but globally. And the aim is to facilitate exchange between the public and the experts that will inform, seek inputs, and provide practical help where relevant. So first on the agenda is the Draft Sexual Harassment Act. Currently before the Joint Select Committee of Parliament, Jamaica is on the verge of passing a sexual harassment law that proposes to hold workplaces and state institutions accountable to impose penalties for wrongdoing. So on behalf of the United Nations agencies implementing Spotlight Initiative in Jamaica, I commend the government of Jamaica for this bold step in the right direction and for its unwavering commitment to finalizing this legislative process concerning Sexual Harassment Act. We must, though, remain invested in ensuring that Jamaica passes the best possible fit for purpose legislation. Let's keep talking and sharing until we get this done and done right. For too many women, and also like Empress said, men as well, workplaces and roadways are battle zones. Sexual harassment imposes a personal, professional, and mental cost on victims, and a reputational and productive cost on organizations. But many people suffer in silence, fearing loss of job, perceiving that there isn't enough, there's insufficient recourse in the workplace policy and law, and that's why this is so important. So we have unwanted catcalls. People are touching you, crude and degrading statements when you are not paying attention to them because you want to ignore them. Advantages of unequal power dynamics. If someone is your boss, female or male, and they feel that they have an advantage over you and trying to persuade you to do things that make you uncomfortable, amounts to unhappy workers and unsafe and toxic work environments. We must recognize sexual harassment for what it is. It is an assault on the dignity, productivity, and career perspective of all men, women, boys, girls. So research has confirmed that the reality of sexual harassment is much bigger than the complaints that we see documented. A 2007 study in Hong Kong showed that nearly 25% of workers interviewed suffer sexual harassment. But can you imagine? Only 6.6% reported their grievances because they either felt too embarrassed or that they would be ridiculed. In the European Union, astonishing 40 to 50% of women report some form of sexual harassment or unwanted sexual behavior in the workplace. And a 2004 report in Italy indicates that 55% of women between the ages of 14 and 59 have reported being victims of sexual harassment. So recognizing the serious nature of sexual harassment and its impact on the workforce, UNDP has developed a policy on harassment, sexual harassment, discrimination, and abuse of authority. And there are 7 guiding principles evident in the policy that I would like to share with you today. So the first one, there is a mandatory requirement for each of our country offices to promulgate the policy and to report on this progress. This means that every year, all country offices are required to formulate work plans on how we will foster a harassment-free environment and to educate staff and partners about its provisions. 2, the policy adopts a rights-based approach with the well-being of team members taking primacy. UNDP's holistic approach is designed to create and maintain a working environment that respects the inherent dignity of all persons, affording them the opportunity to reach their fullest potential and empowering them to deliver the best possible results for UNDP and the people we serve, which in this case is Jamaica. 3, the serious nature of the offense is emphasized. Sexual harassment is regarded as prohibited conduct at UNDP, and team members found guilty may be subjected to administrative, disciplinary, or contractual measures, and if it's really bad, up to and including dismissal. 4, complainants and whistleblowers are afforded significant protection. So retaliation against a complainant is also a prohibitive conduct. Complainants are protected at UNDP and can officially file for protection against retaliation if they feel they have been threatened during the course of an investigation. So anyone who retaliates against whistleblowers will face sanctions up to dismissal. So you can see that there is zero tolerance. 5, the sanctity of the investigation process is protected. The investigation is assigned to a special office at our headquarters in New York. Persons with a complaint have the right to either go directly into a dispute resolution process or to skip that altogether and initiate a formal complaint process. 6, there is frank and open access to resources and complaint mechanisms, including a 24-hour hotline to clarify issues and to officially file their complaints without the knowledge or say-so of the field office. And last but not least, accountability is strong. The policy holds managers, that's myself and other line managers, accountable for taking the prescribed steps to handle complaints that may come to their attention. So the multi-country office, because we cover, including Jamaica, we are covering a number of other countries, is currently in the process of conducting its internal campaign with staff, our implementing partners, and we welcome the opportunity to share further insights from our policy with interested organizations. And in that way, it keeps the exchange flowing and that transfer of knowledge is happening. We have an opportunity during the period of the global commemoration of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence to let our voices be heard. But let me just encourage you, it shouldn't just be these 16 days. 365 days we should be advocating for this. And also we're doing this, as Novia had just talked about, through the Spotlight Initiative. And we hope that we can count on all of you as partners as we go through this journey. Thank you so very much. And I hope that you have a very fruitful discussion. Over to you, Empress.
Thank you so much, Denise. I made so many notes. I captured the 7 guiding principles because I know so many organizations right now who are trying to draft their own policy, and some of them are doing it alone. And I can't wait to share this information with them. Thank you so much. Recognize it for what it is, she said. It's an assault on our dignity and productivity. And I love what Denise spoke about with the principles there at UNDP. When you talked about zero tolerance, fostering a harassment-free environment, handling the complaints, accountability, big words. Yes, and it's not just 16 days of activism. It's going to be every day, 24 hours, like your hotline there at UNDP. Again, thank you so much for your contribution and great work. All right, so we are going to have another moment to hear from some of you in the chat before we get into the big round table. We want to know what you think about this next video, this next scenario, and we will also run a poll to see what you feel. And again, you are welcome to put your responses in the chat about how you feel after you see this video. All right, let's run it.
Emma works in a phone shop. Dominic is a courier contracted by the phone company to deliver and remove stock once a day. They are comfortable with each other and have the same sense of humour. They often flirt and joke around. Is this sexual harassment?
Okay, the polls are going to go up right now. Is that sexual harassment? Give us a second. All right, the poll is up. Come on, everybody. Yes, I want 100% response to this poll. Is that sexual harassment? Not sure, no. Some saying yes. Feel free to elaborate on that in the chat. Remember, this is a conversation. It's a round table. It's a new way of speaking. We polls, chats, online, Facebook, YouTube. We are all over the place. And we are reviewing the comments as well and capturing them on the social media platforms. Thank you so much. For those of you in Zoom, the poll is in progress. Emma says, no, it's not sexual harassment because there is acceptance and permission from the woman. It's not a power play situation, okay? Debbie Ann is responding here saying only if unwanted, or if their flirting is so sexual that it is causing an uncomfortable environment for others. Interesting, Debbie, and I'm sure the experts will have a conversation about that. They're flirting, but what is acceptable behavior in the acceptable sexual behavior in the workplace? That's something we need to have a conversation about as well. Are these things mentioned in the policy of an organization? How two people can interact in the workplace? All right, I'm seeing the comments coming in. Arlene says it's a mutual situation. Only 51% have responded. Come on, my people. Come on. We want to hear your views. Andrea says it looks welcomed. It looks welcomed. She didn't seem as if she was uncomfortable. All right. Vivian Reed says, putting his arm around the person's shoulder. I don't think so. All right. We're going to give you just a few more seconds. Grab a glass of water. All right, stay hydrated. We have a lot of work to do, 24 hours around the clock every single day until we can eliminate violence in this country against our women, our girls, our men, our boys. As we work hard to fast track and see this bill passed into law, and see all organizations working hard to look after their staff to foster an harassment-free environment. All right, that's usually how it starts. Ruth Ann is saying that's usually how it starts. All right, we're gonna end this one now. We're gonna end, all right, there we go. So the results is that sexual harassment, the video you just saw, 4%, as 12%, 4 people responded saying yes. 76%, 26 responded saying no. And 12%, 4 people saying they're not sure. Well, by the end of this day, we're going to be sure about what it looks like for us here in this country. All right, together, we are going to define it, understand it, and deal with it. But we're not going to accept it. Put in a spotlight on it. Let's hear what the video has to say about that. See ya.
Even though her employer may frown at this behaviour, this is not sexual harassment because the feelings between Emma and Dominic are mutual. Neither of them feel embarrassed, intimidated, or feel anything negative about the interaction.
Okay, well, that's the verdict. Thanks, brethren. That's my brethren responding there from overseas, joining us in this Spotlight Initiatives Roundtable. All right, again, thank you to all the partners here today. Thank you all for turning up. When sexual harassment happens, do you know what should we do? How do we respond as an individual, as a company, as a country? We now welcome our panel of experts who will be presenting in the order I mentioned them. Legal Officer, Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sports, Georgette Grant. Yeah. Head of the Hugh Shearer Labor Studies Institute, UWI Open Campus, the great Danny Roberts. Yes. And UN Stress Counselor, Kamala McWhinney. A proud product of the Norman Manley School, Georgette Grant has 8 years experience as an attorney at law. Called to the legal fraternity in 2012, Georgette has spent her time immersing herself in the practice and study of law. What are we talking about, my people, here today? We're talking about law, the Sexual Harassment Act, and how we are going to make it happen. So if you want to know all about it, the lady is here to share. And Danny Roberts has spent more than, I think, 20 years in the trade union movement, serving as VP of the National Workers Union and President of the Union of Clerical, Administrative, and Supervisory Employees. He currently serves as VP of the umbrella trade union organization, the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions. All right, who do we have next? And then right after that, we'll have Kamala McWhinney. She is an associate clinical psychologist and psychological safety trainer and coach. She is passionate about creating work cultures that promote wellness and inclusion. When she is not working on her passion projects, she is intentionally tapping into self-care and feeding her spirit. Ooh! This is going to be a good roundtable. So again, grab some water, grab your pen, grab your paper, make those notes so we can make a difference when we leave here today. All right, so we're going to start, and all the panelists will jump into the roundtable right now. Let me see, are they here? Let me see. We're bringing them up on the screen, everybody. Give us a second. All right, let me check with my tech team. I'm not seeing or hearing them. Give me a second. Oh, they're on the screen. I'm just not seeing them. Okay. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So, Georgette, please, I would love you to kick this off for me.
All right. Thank you very much, Empress. I must say I have been enjoying what has been happening since we started the videos, your energetic self, and really the participation of all the attendees that we have today. I am going to ask the team if you can make me a co-host so I can share this presentation, please, so we can really get to what has become a very important bill, one that has generated quite a bit of discussion in the media, in households, in various public places, and we know that the public on a whole is very anxious for the passage of this particular bill. So let me get right into it so you can know the provisions that are currently in there, and I'm going to share with you what might possibly change based on the discussions that have been taking place thus far at the Joint Select Committee. Empress, are you seeing the PowerPoint?
I sure am, and I am making notes. I am screenshotting. I am ready. Let's do this.
All right. So, morning again, everyone. Welcome as we really walk through the sexual harassment bill. It's not a very long bill in comparison to other pieces of legislation, but what I have done, I have really tried to summarize the offerings of the bill. And so let's get right to it. So just to give you a bit of history, there was a bill in 2015, and that bill really was spearheaded by the then Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Portia Simpson Miller. Upon the advent of the Jamaica Labour Party administration, that bill was withdrawn to allow for the closing of gaps that were recognized, and as a result, a new round of consultations had to be done, and we eventually put the bill together in 2018. On July 9, 2019, this bill, the bill that is now in the public space, was tabled in Parliament, and after which it was referred to a Joint Select Committee of Parliament. And that is where we have been since 2019, and we still are. So what can you expect in this iteration of the bill? It is written in gender neutral language, and it outlines conduct which constitutes sexual harassment and prohibits certain related conduct in workplaces, institutions, and landlord and tenant relationships. So the bill presents under these following headings. Part 1 of the bill is a preliminary section, and I'm going to tell you what comes in each section in a little while. Part 2, the prevention of sexual harassment. Part 3, forms of sexual harassment and related prohibited conduct. Part 4, designation of authorized officer. Part 5, sexual harassment tribunal. Part 6, the procedure for making complaints, investigations, and hearing by the tribunal. Part 7, offenses and penalties. And Part 8, the miscellaneous section. So Part 1, the preliminary section. What are you going to see when you look at the bill? Well, Part 1 identifies obviously what the name of the legislation is. It's a Sexual Harassment Act. That's what the legislation is called. That too might change based on the discussions that we have been having at the Joint Select Committee as to the fact that that name doesn't properly capture what the bill is intended for. So the name might very well change, and it defines certain key terms that are used. Clause 2 is where you find the definition of all these key terms, and I've just listed them for you. So accommodation, complainant, complaint, correctional institution, court, co-worker, domestic worker, employer, employment, hearing, institution, psychiatric facility, respondent, sexual advance, sexual harassment, supervisor, tribunal, and worker. And all these terms are defined in the bill. Now, I want you to look on the picture that's in the background of the slide. We were speaking earlier about what is sexual harassment, and we were really working our minds based on the videos that were shown to distinguish if video A was sexual harassment as opposed to video B. Now, in this picture, we see that the gentleman, his hand is placed on the lady's leg and she appears shocked. So what is sexual harassment according to the bill? Section 2 defines it, or clause 2, because it's still a bill. Clause 2 defines it as the making of any unwelcome sexual advance towards a person by another person. And I want you to take note of a person by another person as opposed to by a male to a female or by a female to a male. A person by another person which is reasonably regarded as offensive or humiliating by the person towards whom the sexual advance is made, or has the effect of interfering unreasonably with work performance of the person to whom the sexual advance is made, or 2, creating an intimidating, offensive, or a hostile environment. So in this picture that I have in this slide, clearly based on her behavior, the fact that she has dressed back from the gentleman, you see that, and the expression on her face, you see that this is unwelcomed by her, as opposed to, what was it, Emma and Dominic. What was happening there was mutual. Both of them felt the same way, and that's not sexual harassment. However, it can come a point where a mutual situation can later turn to become one that is sexually harassing. So Section 2.3 says, in order to determine whether any act conduct or behavior constitutes sexual harassment, these are the things that we look for. All the circumstances surrounding the act, conduct, or behavior. You're going to consider whether the conduct or behavior constituted a course of conduct, or if not, if a single significant instance is sufficiently serious to be so determined. That is very important. And the determination shall be based on the findings in the particular case. Now, I just want to go back to the definition of sexual harassment. It speaks to, in part A, paragraph A rather, sexual advance. Now, the bill, I didn't put it in this presentation because I'm trying to operate within my time constraints, but the bill also defines what sexual advance is, and permit me, I'm just going to read it for you. Sexual advance involves one or more of the following acts, form of conduct, or behavior, namely physical contact of a sexual nature. So this is what this would be: physical contact of a sexual nature. B, a demand or request for sex or for favors of a sexual nature. C, the making of sexual suggestions, remarks, or innuendos. D, the showing of pornography or the display of images or objects of a sexual nature. And E, any other physical, gestural, verbal, non-verbal, or visual conduct of a sexual nature. All right? So now, how do we prevent sexual harassment? Well, employers and heads of institutions, the bill imposes an obligation on these individuals to prepare a policy statement. I know Denise spoke earlier about UNDP's policy statement and the tenets of the statement. So what this part of the bill outlines is what is expected to be in your policy statement. In earlier versions, there was a template. There is no template in this iteration of the bill. There has been robust discussion at the Joint Select Committee that this should be inserted once again into a schedule of the bill. Hopefully that is done, but unfortunately we don't have the template there. But it was felt that it would be necessary to aid employers and heads of institutions alike in really crafting their policy statement. But let me hasten to say that if you are desirous of putting together your policy statement separate and apart from what is entailed in the bill, you can contact the Bureau of Gender Affairs, which is the agency that is working along with this piece of legislation, and they will help you to craft your policy. So what must be in your policy statement? There must be a definition of sexual harassment. You should include the internal mechanisms and procedures available for dealing with sexual harassment claims, a statement explaining the disciplinary measures that may be taken in respect of sexual harassment, a statement that an employer or person in charge of an institution should not disclose any information relating to a complaint or the circumstances of a complaint to any person except as necessary for the purpose of investigation or taking disciplinary action. 5, you're going to inform in your policy statement workers, residents, inmates, wards, as the case may be, of their right to seek redress from the tribunal. And a statement that a victim of sexual harassment should exhaust all internal mechanisms and procedures available to the person before making a complaint to the tribunal. Every employer and or person in charge of an institution should take immediate and appropriate action to deal with any complaint of sexual harassment where they become aware of it. And there has been quite a lot of talk as it surrounds aware of it. How does an employer become aware? How does a head of institution become aware? Is it when I report it? Is it based on what you have seen with your own eyes? And certainly the consensus is when it is reported, it doesn't have to be by you, it could be by somebody else. But as soon as you become aware that person A, has been affected or sexually harassed, it is your duty to take immediate and appropriate action to deal with it. All right. Just bear in mind the internal mechanisms and procedures. I'm going to come back to that a little later. Part 3 continues to highlight that sexual harassment, when displayed, places a prohibition on the said conduct if displayed by employers, co-workers, supervisors, heads of institutions, staff, any person in authority, and landlord. So what part 3 really deals with, it highlights that sexual harassment can take place between these various categories: employers, co-workers, supervisors, heads of institutions, staff, any person in authority, and landlords. So clause 7, subclause 1, subclause 2 prohibits an employer or supervisor from harassing a worker, and such an employer or supervisor should not make it appear to the worker that prospects or working conditions are hinged on the employee's acceptance of the harassment. And I think we saw that in the first video with the 2 persons in the vehicle. Subclauses 3, 4, and 5 place a prohibition on co-workers from harassing each other and a prospective employer from harassing a prospective employee. Additionally, a prospective employer shall not make it appear to the prospective employee that your employment or the terms of your employment are contingent on the acceptance of the harassment. Also, in that part 3, subclause 6 bars any employer, and this was mentioned by Denise when she spoke about what is in the UNDP policy, bars an employer from taking any adverse action against an employee who has commenced proceedings under the Act, who gives testimony, or otherwise participates in any investigation, procedure, or proceeding initiated under the Act. All right. Clause 8 outlines the same prescriptions as Clause 7. So Clause 8 outlines the prescriptions for the employer, what the employer is to do, and those same obligations or duties are imposed on the head of an institution. Clause 9 addresses sexual harassment in landlord-tenant relationships, which we learned last week, no, the week before, 2 weeks ago actually, from the Rent Assessment Board, that is happening quite frequently here in Jamaica. Sexual harassment by a landlord, whether as a principal or agent. So if it is that the landlord is away, but he or she has deputized the running of the place to Jane or John, they now become the agent. So, and if they harass the tenant, it is still sexual harassment. So whether by the principal, the actual landlord, or the agent to a tenant, an actual tenant or a prospective tenant, it's prohibited. Furthermore, a landlord shall not make it appear to a tenant that the offering of accommodation is dependent on the tenant's acceptance of the sexual advances. So the designated officer, the authorized officer, in a nutshell, these are persons that will be attached to the Bureau of Gender Affairs. They are the persons that will be responsible for investigating complaints of sexual harassment and securing proper observances for sections 3, now clause 3, and clause 4 as it relates to the duties on the employer and or head of an institution. So clause 3 speaks to duty to ensure environment free from sexual harassment. And 4, the duty to issue the policy statement and investigate any complaint under that act. So if the authorized officer comes to Company A and realizes that Company A is operating contrary to section 3, which is now clause 3 and 4, then what that authorized officer will do, he or she will say to the head of the entity, listen, I notice that these things are not in place. And based on the act, you are supposed to be operating in this way. I'm giving you 30 days within which to remedy the situation. And if after the 30 days, then we have to proceed differently. So what is going to happen is that if an authorized officer finds that sections 3 and 4 are not being properly observed, such an officer may issue a direction setting out, as I told you, the terms of compliance and the time not being less than 30 days, which is the lower limit. And a person who without a reasonable excuse fails to comply with the direction commits an offense under the legislation and is liable on summary conviction in the parish court to be fined $1 million, which is the maximum fine as it stands now in the bill. Authorized officers, when they are investigating, they are to show what we have termed as a certificate of designation, which essentially is to show to the person, could be the complainant, it could be a witness, it could be the head of the entity, whomever it is that is involved in the investigation, that I am certified to investigate these matters, and here is proof that I have been so certified. And why that is important, because we want to safeguard the trust of the complainant. We want to allow persons to feel comfortable that these are people that have been so trained and so designated to investigate these complaints. Okay? So now, let's go to the Sexual Harassment Tribunal. Permit me. Thank you. The Sexual Harassment Tribunal in Part 5. And I have an asterisk there, and you'll see at the bottom, I put 2018 edition, because this was not originally in the 2015 version. The 2015 version stipulated that all complaints of sexual harassment were to proceed to the Industrial Disputes Tribunal, a special division of the Industrial Disputes Tribunal. That has been removed. And we have now created a separate tribunal to hear sexual harassment claims, and also because the Ministry of Labor and Social Security alerted us in the treaties that they sent to us that this proceeding to the disputes tribunal was not a very good idea. So this tribunal will hear all sexual harassment claims. It speaks to the composition of the tribunal, which is, it's 12 persons as it is now, 4 attorneys at law, 4 trained mediators who have been so certified, and 4 other persons to whom it appears to the minister have experience in gender-related matters and so forth. It speaks to the tribunal's roles and functions, and this part works in tandem with part 6 that speaks to the procedures and the processes that should be employed when one is making complaints and how the tribunal operates in terms of hearing complaints of sexual harassment. So let's go to part 6, and Mr. Roberts will remember this part well. This is the part that really got the whole country talking, the 12 months time limit for the making of claims. And I highlighted it in red, not only to bring a spotlight to the time limit, but to say that certainly by all indications and all the submissions that we have heard from 2019 until now, this is certainly going to change. What it will change to, I am unable to say, but I know this is going to change. Some have said it's too short. Some have said it's fine, because in other countries it's 3 months. In some countries it's 1 year. In other countries it's 6 months. But certainly the inclination is to enlarge the time. So not keeping it at the 12 months, and certainly not going to 3 or 6, but to go much further than 12 months, to give persons so aggrieved by a harasser more time to make those complaints, bearing in mind the trauma that many persons live with for months on end after these kinds of acts are perpetrated upon them. So where it is 1 instance, as it is now, you have 12 months to make the report. where it is an act, it's where the act comprises a series of acts, then time starts to run from the last act in the series. Now, before a person proceeds to the tribunal, you remember in previous slides, I told you to make note of internal mechanisms and procedures. So we're back here again. A complainant is to exhaust actually, the bill says, all internal mechanisms and procedures before making a complaint to the tribunal. However, the bill does recognize that there are instances where this might not be possible nor ideal for a complainant. And in those cases, the complainant can proceed directly to the tribunal if he or she can show that if they use internal mechanisms and procedures that have been listed in the policy statement, they are likely to be prejudiced, or they show to the tribunal that there are no such internal procedures or policies at my place of employment, in my institution, none has been made available to me. Can I come to you? And in that case, the tribunal will grant leave to such a person. So these are some other clauses that you should make note of. Clause 26 mandates that the particulars of the complaint are not to be communicated. If that is done, that's an offense. The tribunal may call for an investigation into an allegation once it has satisfied itself that the complaint is not frivolous or vexatious. This also has caused a lot of discussion. What is frivolous? What is vexatious? And what it really means is that there is merit. There is merit in your claim. This is not being done out of malice. And this is not something that is coming to really waste the time of the tribunal. There is a substantial claim here. There is merit to what you're saying. And so we're going to take your claim. Clause 28 refrains. It says that the tribunal may refrain from proceeding any further with a matter once it finds that there is no merit, there is lack of evidence of sexual harassment, and where they decide to do that, then the decision will be communicated to the complainant. The procedures employed by the tribunal relative to the matters before it and how the tribunal conducts its proceedings, and what the bill has right now is that the procedures, the tribunal will proceed similarly to a court. So in terms of how complaints come before it, how persons are summoned to come before the tribunal, how witness statements are written, subclauses, well, clauses 30 to 33 detail how they conduct their proceedings and the awards. So having listened to any claim of sexual harassment, the tribunal may make one of the following awards, or two, if they so choose, or any such other award as they see fit. They can dismiss the complaint. I don't see any evidence here, lack of evidence. There is no merit in this claim. I'm dismissing the complaint. And as I told you a while ago, that will be communicated to the complainant. They can issue a declaration that the respondent is not to repeat or continue the conduct. Direct that redress be made to the complainant for any loss or damage suffered. Direct that the respondent should employ or re-employ the complainant. I participated maybe some weeks ago in a General Legal Counsel webinar on the same sexual harassment issue. And one of the points that was made had to do with the re-employing of the complainant. The point that was being made was that it is unfair that employers will be, certainly under the bill as it is now, mandated to re-employ a complainant, especially in cases where the complainant might not be qualified for the position. And so that too has been generating a lot of discussion. Direct that the respondent pay damages to the complainant. Direct that the termination of a contract be varied to redress any loss or damage, that should be damage, pardon me, suffered by the complainant. Employer should take such actions within a reasonable time as the tribunal directs and report it to the tribunal, or they can make any such other award as the tribunal sees fit. I don't know if that is going to stay, make such other award, because one of the complaints that was levied against this particular paragraph is that the tribunal has too wide a power, wider than even the very court that has inherent jurisdiction. So that too might very well change, or it might not. I'm not sure. Let's see what happens. So where the tribunal makes an award for compensation, there is no limit that they are to take into consideration. There is no range for what they can award. So they can award however much they feel, however little they feel, and that award is to take into account injury to the complainant's feelings or humiliation suffered. So certainly it will not be a minimal sum. It should be based on this, a sizable compensation, and that amount is recoverable as a civil debt without any limit on amount. So it doesn't matter if the amount is high, it doesn't mean that it will not be able to be recovered. As it is, you can recover it as a civil debt without limit on amount. And any person who fails to comply with any award that the tribunal gives is liable to be fined $1 million, which I told you is the maximum, or 3 months imprisonment. If you are dissatisfied with the award of the tribunal, you can appeal to the Supreme Court, where judicial review will take place of the decision, but it only should be on a point of law, right? If you are dissatisfied with the decision or award on a point of law. So not because, well, boy, you know, I didn't like whose attitude and this, no. If it's on a point of law, sure. Other than that, no. Offenses and penalties. Failure to attend a hearing, you're liable to be fined or imprisoned. Failure to furnish information or produce documents to the tribunal. Any person appearing as a witness and failing to be sworn, affirm, or refusing to answer any question. You know, some people, their religion prevents them from swearing, so they prefer to be affirmed. If you don't want to be affirmed, you don't want to answer any questions, you don't want to be sworn, you commit an offense under the legislation. If you interrupt the proceedings, if you use any insulting language to the tribunal, if you publish, permit, divulge, or communicate anything contrary to Clause 26, which prohibits particulars of complaint to be communicated. If you knowingly furnish false or misleading information to the tribunal, if you threaten to subject any person appearing before the tribunal to any adverse action, and if you make any false complaints. And the miscellaneous section really deals with the minister's powers, what the minister can do. Power to make regulations, the monetary penalties can be amended if you feel that the 1 million is not a sufficient deterrent, that can be amended, and certainly to conduct a review with both sides of the host of the legislation from time to time. And that is really, ladies and gentlemen, what the bill provides for in a nutshell. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Georgette. Great information there. I'm going to keep it moving, and then we're going to have an opportunity for some of our participants here in the Zoom to ask questions to any of you, Georgette, Kamala, or Danny. So Danny has spent 20 years, as I said, in the trade union movement. I'm sure he has seen some things and will share with us, hopefully, some of the avenues for redress that victims right now of sexual harassment currently have. Maybe share with us some successes that you've seen, real life cases, etc. And what aspects of this draft legislation do you think could be strengthened? Over to you, Mr. Roberts.
Thank you very much, Empress. Is it afternoon or still morning?
Oh no, I'm so caught up with everything, I've lost track of time. Either way, good day.
All right, good day, everybody. Thanks very much for having me on the panel. It is an important observation because it fits into something George mentioned in the legislation in respect to the composition of the tribunal. And in many cases, discussions, webinars of sexual harassment is predominantly women who are involved as both participants and presenters. And there's a thing that I just want to put, two things I want to put in respect to the legislation for consideration, Georgia. One is that the legislation speaks to the fact that at least 6 of the 12 persons must be female. And in the construction of a tribunal, at least 1 must be female. I think we also need to make sure that the reverse is true and that we don't end up with all 12 females or 3 of the panelists all females. So there needs to be something in the legislation that ensures that there's a balance between male and female. The second issue that I would put on the table for consideration in respect to legislation is if it in a case, perhaps it is not the business of the legislation to make any further pronouncement, but certainly if the managing director, the CEO of a company is charged for sexual harassment and there's going to be a penalty, a charge, who pays that? Is it a personal charge or is it to be absorbed by the company? I make the point that there's a hospital in California which had such a case, sexual harassment case legislation, and they paid out somewhere in the region of $168 million for feelings and loss of the job loss, and take into account the psychological trauma, etc., that the victim endured. So those are projects I put forward for consideration. From a trade union perspective, from a labor perspective, broaden it in terms of from a working class, workplace perspective, employee-employee relationship. One of the important things I think about sexual harassment is how it is viewed and how it is seen. And certainly at the global level, the view of sexual harassment is that it is a human rights issue. And therefore, if it's a human rights issue, the approach to resolving sexual harassment takes on a particular dimension. So at the workplace level, what is expected is that sexual harassment is to be seen as an anti-sexual harassment posture and stance. Certainly needs to be taken by organizations, and that they must do all within their powers to create an environment in which all employees can operate with dignity and respect, which is consistent with their fundamental and inalienable right of as a citizen to be so treated. And so that is an important consideration that needs to take place. Certainly for us in Jamaica, in particular in the Caribbean, there's a historic context within which we can't ignore when we look at sexual harassment, particularly as it relates to domestic workers. And one of the things that we would have recognized over time is that domestic workers, that their contribution to nation building is undervalued, in many cases invisible. And therefore, a lot has to be done to ensure that special consideration is taken in respect to domestic workers whose workplace is actually the home. I know, for example, Jamaica Household Workers Union will be making their presentation this afternoon before the Joint Select Committee. And I know that some of the recommendations will seek to strengthen the legislation in that regard. But there are two important considerations, I think, going forward. First of all, there's a ILO convention number 189, which was passed about 2 years ago, which deals with sexual harassment and violence. And one of the weaknesses of our present legislation, which I hope that as soon as it is passed, that will certainly make the effort to strengthen, is in the area of violence, and violence which may not occur at the workplace, but may occur outside of the workplace. So somebody traveling to work or from work can be subject to sexual harassment and violence in that regard. And I can very well recall an incident some years ago where a woman was sadly killed on her way to work by her former husband. So there is a need for us to look at them, to take into account, as the convention seeks to do, how do we treat with harassment, which may not necessarily take place within the confines of the workspace, and what measures can be put in place to protect workers who may be going to work or from work, as we have done in some other instances where collective labor agreements have sought to address issues relating to workers' safety, traveling to work and from work by providing transportation, etc. But how is it that we need to address sexual harassment? As I said earlier, it is a human rights issue, and therefore the legislation is an important step in addressing it, but cannot be the only step. It is important that we do a couple of things. One of the things that we're doing at the Hugh Shearer Labor Studies Institute is that we're in partnership with the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports, in collaboration with the Bureau of Gender Affairs, where we're doing a series of sensitization workshops on sexual harassment. And we have done several of those over the last couple of months. But importantly, we need to understand that that is not sexual harassment training. Sexual harassment training goes much deeper than that. Because what we want to begin to address in the psyche of our Jamaican people, both male and female, particularly our male, is the question of that dignity and respect. The need for us to begin to develop a new sense of self that takes us away from some of those cultural inheritances and stereotypes that make particularly our men, not exclusively, but particularly our men, believe that it is right to violate the right of women. And so the sexual harassment training is something that has to begin at the primary school level, at the infant school level, early childhood education, where we begin to train youngsters in how to respect themselves, how to respect others, how to treat people with dignity, how to cooperate, how to understand the cultural sensibilities and diversities that we may have to face, and to be tolerant of those even if we do not accept it. And so all of this has to be a new kind of a social reengineering process that begins to address the question of how we look at ourselves and how we look at others. There's a legacy issue going back to the days of slavery and colonialism, much of which feeds into the way we think of and behave towards women in particular, and we need to retrain, re-socialize, re-engineer our thought process to begin to address those issues. Another aspect of our work, and certainly again at the Hugh Shearer Labor Studies Institute, we have commenced that. We have been working with a university out of Canada, Brock University. Dr. Simon Black, who's a professor there, and myself are engaged in a research to look, first and foremost, is just one aspect of many research agenda that we hope to build out. But how many, and this is primarily focused on domestic workers in particular, how is the right of workers being understood and respected? Is there a sense in which we need to make both employers and employees recognize that there's a greater sense in which we need to begin to show more respect to each other? The sexual harassment training has to look both at the supervisor and the employer in the context of what the sexual harassment language speaks about in terms of quid pro quo, where you get benefits, employment benefits on the basis of sexual favors, as to address that. and also us to address it between workers and co-workers. And there are many issues which has arisen, again, which we need to educate and train people to have a better understanding and appreciation of as to what really constitutes sexual harassment. Now, in the recent video, there was an argument that if both persons are consensual in terms of the act, it is not sexual harassment. There are two things which arises from that. First of all, it may not be, but there may become a point at which it is inappropriate sexual behavior at the workplace. And so a third party can make such a complaint, even if the two parties are consensual in the act. But the second part of the legislation, and this is a gray area, is that the intimidating and hostile working environment can arise simply from a poster that is in an office. And there was a case in Canada some years ago where a woman actually sued the employer because in a male-dominated workplace, there were many half-nude and nude pictures of women, and she felt that it created an intimidating and hostile working environment, and she won the case. So one could argue that if it is that there is a frequency with these two persons who are continuously flirting and doing that, could it, and I'm just simply posing the question, could it be seen as creating an intimidating and hostile working environment? And a case we made up for that. There are some challenges in terms of dealing with some of these things, but sexual harassment is has many gray areas. It's not black and white. In many cases, and I've had several sexual harassment cases to deal with, the question really boils down to he says, she says. And the question of credibility of one or the other has to be a judgment call of a tribunal. So what I would say in summary is that in looking at sexual harassment, whilst this is important that we deal with the offenders, that the workplace certainly needs to begin to look at things like counseling sessions for both the victims and the perpetrator. Look at things like mentorship, because there are many persons who come into the workplace, but come out of a situation in his, particularly the inner city, where he grew up seeing a total disregard and disrespect for women, which he considers to be the norm. Right? He's not aware of an alternative approach. He has not seen respect shown to his mother, to his sister, to the girls in the community. And so there's a need for mentorship program, which extends well beyond just sexual harassment, but general attitudes and values that we hold, as well as the counseling program, because both the male and the female, and whoever the victims and the perpetrators may be, certainly needs counseling in that regard. So if we have that mentorship program, counseling program, we do the proper sexual harassment training, which doesn't focus on sexual harassment in and of itself, but look at it in the context of human rights and what are the kind of behavior that we wish to promote and value. Have the legislation create an environment in which people can get a sense that this workplace is anti-sexual harassment. Then I think we can begin to address the workplace issue, even as we look outside of the workplace and get government now to begin to introduce in early childhood education, primary school, secondary school, university, questions to deal with general attitude and self-respect, respect for others, what are some of the main tenets of human rights, etc., etc. To begin to address it from those fundamental standpoints, then I think that we should be able to begin to prevent in many instances, but certainly where it occurs, to ensure that the legislation takes its full course. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Danny. Whew, changing the culture, changing the behavior. You teach a child now, you know what kind of man and woman he's going to be. There's so many elements in this advocacy to end violence against our women and children. And I agree with you, a re-engineering, re-socializing. Boy, we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. And before I bring in our next speaker, I'm going to ask you all, please feel free to drop some questions in the chat after our next speaker, Camilla, and we will try and get through a couple of them. Unfortunately, this could take, this is a big conversation. We're trying to do it all now. But as you were speaking there, Danny, as you were speaking, Georgia, I was thinking about my own situations, growing up, you're a teenager, you walk into a meeting, a power meeting, you think you have it all together. Not a teenager, let's say past, like late teens going into early 20s. And I have been so intimidated because you're trying to get ahead, but these men only see me at this point as a sex object. And I have to show them that I have a brain and I have the ability to do the work, but it feels like it was such a fight. You had to really kind of always fighting off, you had to put on this big armor to get through all of that, to get to the next stage where it's like, can we have a seat, can I have a seat at the table where you show me respect and not look at me as just a piece of bone, a piece of meat, an object. And I know many girls struggle with that and some laugh it off, because they're so uncomfortable, you don't know what to say because of that powerful position that the person holds. It can be very intimidating. And as we speak about it, I'm looking at my own life. I'm like, Lord, I've had to navigate some sexual harassment waters right there. But we do need to have the conversation at every level. So we are clear what it looks like for a woman, a girl, and a man, and see how we can change a narrative and really show them the behavior that we want to see in the next few years to really make Jamaica a sexual harassment-free country. All right, everybody, advocacy continues right about now. Camilla McWhinney, it is your time. We're putting the spotlight on you, my clinical psychologist. My mom was a psychologist, so I have a lot of respect for you people. You are amazing people. So Camilla, the spotlight is on you. Let's do this. Let's end sexual harassment. Share what you can with us, and remember, to all the participants here in the Zoom roundtable, share your questions just in the chat or the Q&A, and we will try and respond to you. All right, Camilla, over to you.
Thank you so much, Empress. Let me please just quickly share just a short presentation just to guide our convo this afternoon. And as usual in the Zoom space, I'm going to ask someone to tell me, can you see my screen? Is it up and good?
Not yet, we're waiting. 10, 9, 8, 7.
How about now?
5, 4. Yes, yes.
Awesome. So I'm going to be sharing just a few underpinning concepts to consider, especially as it relates to the psychological impact that sexual harassment can have on those who unfortunately experience it. And one of the first things I want to throw out to us is the fact that sometimes the harassment can be so subtle that even the person on the receiving end can start to question, is this really happening? Is it me? Am I imagining things? But the impact nonetheless is very real. And I was smiling when I saw Georgette pull up this very image, because the image struck me as well. And I want to use it to just highlight the fact that the directness of some instances of sexual harassment can cause shock and paralysis, especially upon first encountering it. Why am I sharing these? Because I want us to be able to better understand what is happening internally for the persons who experience abuse. And if you notice, I'm not saying woman or she, because men do experience sexual harassment as well. Another very important thing to consider is the role that culture can play in how we even start to frame the experience of being harassed. And I'm talking here about our own personal culture, and this has implications for how we were raised, where we're coming from, our levels of assertiveness, if we have had previous experiences with abuse, harassment, or any kind of trauma, right? And of course, as Danny spoke to, the wider culture, the geopolitical culture. A couple of things that I've heard women and another person speak of when they experience harassment or any kind of trauma, we may hear this age-old conversation of intent versus impact. Well, I'm not sure if the person meant anything by it. So it's almost a question of, do I have the right to be offended? Do I have the right to feel traumatized? We may hear things like, he is otherwise a good boss. Like, except for this one thing he or she does, they are a good person. Sometimes we may even start to look inwardly to say, maybe I gave off a vibe. Maybe I gave the impression that this was okay. It's my fault. So and other persons in the space can be a part of the problem by saying things like, you're overreacting, he or she just likes you, or they have big plans for you. And so coming from that, I want to frame very quickly the three major ways in which persons can be affected by sexual harassment. Firstly, mentally and emotionally. We're talking about things like depression. And as I mentioned earlier, the shock and denial that can come into play early. Anger, this kind of unresolved rage, this generalized rage. Fear, frustration, insecurity. So this can be a worsening of previous insecurity, or it can cause someone who has been otherwise very self-assured to all of a sudden become insecure, easily embarrassed, etc. And primarily feelings of powerlessness tend to show up in a space where harassment is taking place. In terms of the body, because as you know, Empress and everybody else, there's a very strong mind-body connection, right? That we all need to be more aware of. And so what happens in the mind will have implications for what happens in the body. We're talking about things like headaches, feeling very fatigued, and the kind of fatigue that sleep doesn't cure. We're talking about gastrointestinal with belly problem, belly pains, belly workings, as Jamaicans say, skin reactions, fluctuations in weight, insomnia, and other sleep disturbances, and things like phobias. All of a sudden, perhaps becoming very afraid of being in a particular type of room. Something like that can easily happen. We're also aware that we can see things like sexual problems coming into play, right? Becoming less easily aroused. Several difficulties can come into play even in one's sexual life. And of course, in the career field, obviously, decreased job satisfaction is very likely. Unfavorable performance evaluations for more reasons than one. Loss of job promotions. And as you can see, things like withdrawal from work. I don't want to go. And this can contribute to the cycle of stigmatization and victimization where, why are you not coming to work, Miss McWinney? And that can feed into getting a negative appraisal and can further worsen and complicate the situation. And all of this is having what? A deleterious effect on well-being. So it's a very vicious cycle. And in summary now, what can we do to move past this issue if you're experiencing it, or to move if you have experienced it past tense, or if you're currently experiencing it? Number one, speaking truth, I think sometimes is undervalued because we become very attached to, if I speak my truth, will this person be brought to justice? And I'm not here to make any pretenses. It can be a very difficult, as Georgette spoke to, and lengthy and expensive and toll-taking journey to getting justice. However, as a psychologist, I must advocate for the value of speaking truth to power, even to a trusted person, to say this happened to me, to say I'm experiencing this, can be hugely cathartic and hugely powerful. Secondly, seeking support. I could not advocate for seeking out a counselor or a psychologist to help one navigate the space. And to remember that I am not standing alone. And I cannot leave without turning the spotlight on the rest of us who may not be affected. What can we do? Because sometimes we maybe unwittingly become a part of the victimization of those who experience harassment. As a non-affected person, what can you do? Number one, simply, it's easy and it's very free. Be a safe, judgment-free, blame-free zone for the person who has experienced harassment. Do not say, what did you do? What did you say? Stand with the person in just processing the fact that this happened to them and they are having a response. Secondly, be an ally. Perhaps you have some positions of power and authority and influence. Believe firstly those who are affected and do what you can in your own way to amplify their voices. Stand with them, go with them, walk with them. Thirdly, be an ally as it relates to calling out offenders, of course, within the rightful ambits of the law, right? and also calling out offensive cultures and actions. So we may not want to be calling specific names to say this person is guilty, because that can cause legal issues. But generally speaking about people who do this, it's not okay. And of course, calling out specific elements of the cultures and actions which are hurtful. And I want to thank you for your attention. And I'm very much open to any questions through Empress or moderator on this issue of how harassment can affect us and what it is that we can do.
Thank you so much, Camilla. Whew, we know what stress can do. And sometimes you see some people in the workplace and you wonder what's going on. We never stop and ask, are you okay? What's going on? When you mentioned what we can do. Okay, but I have a million questions, but it's not my turn. It's for our participants to ask the questions of any of our panelists or speakers. Mainly our panelists are, that's Georgette, Danny, and Camilla. I hope you all don't mind me calling you by your first name. Colleagues, okay. All right, Mr. Roberts, I feel I should be saying Mr. Roberts, you know. All right, so questions now. Let's go with this one. People, my people, please type your questions in the chat. We don't have long and we want to try and get through as many as we can in the next few minutes. This one coming from Emma Lewis. Why does there have to be a time limit at all? Georgette, you spoke to the 1 year, 12-month that is being reviewed, but the question is, it's a good question. Why are we negotiating a time limit at all? Anybody can respond to that. Georgette, maybe you first.
Well, we're negotiating a time limit because you want to balance. We spoke about balancing positions and power play. You want to balance a situation because remember now, there could be persons with legitimate complaints who, as Camilla said, they are struggling with certain effects of the harassing behavior. They might not be ready to talk about it in 6 months, maybe not 3 months, maybe not even a year. So the contemplation is we should give them a little more time. However, you don't want to put an employer or the person who is complained against, especially in situations where it has no merit. Somebody for some reason just does not like this person and feels that, you know, something should be done, and they come up with these false complaints and so on. You don't want to unnecessarily lengthen the process. So you try to strike the balance in that you don't put that employer or supervisor all the way out to sea by giving this limitless amount of time to come with your complaints. But certainly also you want to give those who are affected enough time to come and make their complaints. I will. So that is why the time limit is being considered. I will hasten to say too that in other countries, when we were doing the necessary research, there are some countries that just give 3 months. There are some countries that give 6 months. But we have seen it necessary, and the doctor among us in the Joint Select Committee, Camilla, constantly advocates for the trauma that victims face. So with all of those things at play, that is why the time limit is being suggested, to balance the equation between the person complained against and the complainant.
All right, thank you so much, Georgette. I've been hearing all of our voices, and I am the person who says my people, my people, my people. So I like to hear the voices of my people. So I'm not going to read this next question. I have promoted you, Edmund Campbell, one of our participants here, to ask a question yourself to Mr. Roberts. Are you there, Edmund? You can unmute your mic.
Hello, are you hearing?
Yes, I wanted to hear another male voice. It was just dominated with women. And finally, just Mr.
Okay.
Roberts, no, Mr. Campbell, over to you.
Thank you.
All right, Danny, how you doing?
Hey, not bad.
Right, you raised the question about the consensual sexual activities at the workplace, and you indicated that it was inappropriate, and suggested that there should be, well, the legislation should have something to deal with that particular issue. Just on it for me, and just try to give me an idea as to where exactly would you want, how would you want the legislation actually to address this particular concern?
No. I wasn't suggesting that it includes the legislation. I was making 2 points. The first one is that many organizations have policies that speak to appropriate or inappropriate workplace behavior. And therefore, the first point I'm making is that even although it may be consensual, there is a basis for a third party looking on to raise the question within the context of the organization's policy that this is inappropriate behavior. The second point I was making really now had to do with whether that could rise to the level of offensive working environment. And I throw the proposition that if it is something that perhaps happens quite frequently, then one could raise the question as to how a tribunal would deal with it, would have obviously would based upon the circumstances of the case. But in the same way that a calendar or a poster or something of that nature can raise to the level of creating a hostile working environment, one may very well, find a situation in which so the frequency of such a behavior may so constitute.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Edmund. All right. Dwayne Smalling, are you there, Dwayne? I can read your question, but all right, let me read your question for you. To all panelists, can sexual harassment charges be brought between a married couple? Example, can a wife be sexually harassed by a husband? Georgia?
Let's go like Georgia.
Sticky.
All right, Dwayne. Well, certainly the sexual harassment legislations, not and I speak of other Caribbean territories when I say that. Those legislations mostly focus on interactions in the workplace. There are other entities, there are other countries rather, that do cater for harassment in public spaces. But as it relates to your question, no. But what I will say is because of the reach that the legislation has, workplaces, institutions, landlord and tenant relationships. So no. But as it relates to the married couple, what I will say is as it relates to workers, the definition of worker in the legislation, a domestic worker is captured under that definition. So if you have a domestic worker who claims that they have suffered sexual harassment at the hands of their employer or employers, the married couple, then in that case, the complaint could be made.
May I just extend, Georgette, and say there are other pieces of legislation that would cover sexual offenses, the Sexual Offenses Act, and perhaps other pieces of legislation that would deal with issues as it relates to men, husbands, and wives. As you raise the question of the domestic worker, one of the things I know the Jamaica Household Workers Union have been raising is the question of how do you deal with perhaps a visitor to the household, a relative of your employer, etc., harassing the household employee. So they have raised that, and I'm sure that there has to be some consideration to that as well.
All right, thank you. Georgette, you wanted to add something to that?
I was just going to say, in relation to what you said, Danny, that I'll start where you stopped. That I'm sure that will take on much life tomorrow when they come and make their presentation, and also that the other pieces of legislation that you mentioned, those would cover sexual offenses but not harassment.
Yes.
So yes.
All right. We're all keeping up with the legal conversation here. We're all keeping up. We have a question coming in. Alfia, you wrote a question in the Q&A, and I want to just let you all know we have been answering some of your questions, texting the answers to you, because we can't read all of them out. I hope I don't miss anybody. But Alfia Saunders, I am allowing you to speak and ask your question. Alfia?
Okay, good afternoon. I have two questions. Well, we heard statistics from the EU and I believe Asia. I wanted to know if we have any regional stats on things, for example, like the number of production hours that may have been lost because persons are afraid. Well, persons are making excuses not to show up for work because they're so afraid of the work environment and the sexual harassment that's going on. And also in countries that have anti-sexual harassment laws in the region, are there any numbers, like the number of reports annually? And the second question is the Norman Manley Law School, during their submissions before the Joint Select Committee, they had suggested that sexual harassment should be criminalized. I just wanted to know what are the thoughts of the panel on this proposal?
Well, first of all, I'm not aware of any research which, certainly in the region, Jamaica or the region, which deals to quantify the effects of the loss. I know the United States did it some years ago, looking at the public sector, group productivity loss, absenteeism, individual productivity loss, sick leave, etc. And it came out, they did it over a 2-year period. A little dated is that research, but over a two-year period, it came up to over $300 million in loss. I don't know of any such research done in Jamaica or the wider region. But as to the criminality of sexual harassment, a number of jurisdictions have so imposed. There are elements of sexual harassment which can rise to the level of criminality. I think our legislation focus more on a civil and a disciplinary issue. And again, we have legislation which we need to look at and strengthen that can deal with those that may fall within the realm of criminal actions.
All right, my reporter, is that it? Any more? She's gone. Alfia? Okay. All right. I will. Alfia is from the Jamaica Observer. From what I know, last time I saw her. All right, we have some more questions here. I think, I'm not sure. Sorry, team. I'm trying to keep up on all the platforms. I know I don't want to miss anybody. Somebody asked a question about schools. I don't know where the question went. I think it was, is there anything on sexual harassment in schools? I scanned the question and it disappeared. I'm so sorry.
That's because I answered it.
Okay, all right. That's okay. Yes, you. Okay, Georgette, you're answering them. You're answering them in the Q&A. You're responding, but I know so many people are listening. And Georgette responded saying the Ministry of Education is currently putting a policy together to address harassment between students and teachers. Is this going to happen as well, Georgette, at the university level? Because I remember speaking to some lecturers across the different universities, and they've said that this is a big problem that is not really being addressed. What is happening in the universities, Mr. Roberts, with sexual harassment? Do the universities, the colleges have policies? Is it clear? Are we hearing cases coming out of these institutions?
Yeah, well, I can speak both for the University of the West Indies, which has a sexual harassment policy, and UTEC also has a sexual harassment policy, which I helped them to draft. That they are in place, and we actually began some training at UTEC in that regard. The problem of sexual harassment at universities is a global problem. And when you look, for example, I looked at some statistics for 2017, 2018, and the number of Ivy Leagues I believe, universities that had countless cases of sexual harassment. Harvard, Yale, etc. It's frightening, the phenomenon. Certainly the legislation does address that, sexual harassment at the university. Our university operates both as a workplace and as an institution. And in the context of the definition, students, volunteers, etc., can be sexually harassed. So that that would fall within the context of that. Again, what it requires, two primary things. One, the organization itself really setting about in the same way, for example, in the 10, 15 years ago, when we had the active bauxite sector, that once you come to the gate of a bauxite company, you have no doubt that the most important thing to them was the question of safety. There are signs and the very posture and the atmosphere and environment signal that safety was important. We want to move to that stage at the workplace, where we begin to see signs and an environment created in which there's a zero tolerance understanding and approach to sexual harassment. I must recount, and the other asked Empress earlier, that I remember having to deal with a sexual harassment case in a male predominant sector about 15 years ago. The female was being harassed. She reported it to the HR department. After 6 months, 7 months, nothing happened. The harassment continued. The male at the workplace, perhaps bail threat, that boy, she try to make the man lose his work. And the female at the workplace, perhaps she dressed too sexy, or she wear too much tight jeans, etc. And if it were not for the union, because she was about to resign, that's how it came to our attention. Were it not for the union, then certainly one of those that Camilla speaks about would have lost a career, in addition to the psychological and physiological trauma that she should have suffered. So there's a need for, in my view, a Me Too movement in Jamaica, the equivalent of a Me Too movement that gives women or the victims of sexual harassment an opportunity to seek comfort and support and counseling where necessary. And I make the final point, because one of the things, again, I alluded to, is that while sexual harassment is predominantly men harassing women, there has been an increasing incidence of women harassing men. And I remember doing one of these sex sensitization workshops a couple of years ago. And when I asked the question, is there anybody was being sexually harassed? A gentleman indicated that he was. And we all laughed and said, well, woman harassed the brethren, what? It turned out that a man was harassing him. And it is only after speaking to him that I understand and appreciated two things. One, the trauma that the victim suffered. Why me? What have I done? What signal have I sent? What is it? Am I, prone to this thing here? That is one. And two, and I've learned this certainly from that experience, that this notion that we treat quite glibly with harassment of men by women, we have to stop and learn to appreciate that men don't want to be harassed by anybody, women or otherwise, and that we have to, again, part of the cultural nuance which we have to reform is begin to develop that different mindset about that kind of approach.
Powerful, powerful. And I will add, since, we're speaking openly here, I've spoken to a lot of young men who, when you ask, when did you lose your virginity? Some have said it was somebody working at the house. I don't want to label it in a group, but there are a lot of young men who have lost, or should I say abused or sexually harassed or lost their virginity at home as teenagers with a female worker at the house. So there's a lot of research I think we need to do. I don't know, do we have any, are there any statistics on that when it comes to young men And we hear a lot of statistics about girls and teenage pregnancy and girls who are being abused. Are we asking the boys some of these questions? Do we have any data on those kinds of situations, sexual harassment on boys in Jamaica? Anybody read anything?
Not to my knowledge, Empress. And that is something that the Open Campus through the Usual Labor Studies Institute is trying to address, because through that MOU partnership with the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport, we need to begin to push the research and to have our response driven by data rather than anecdote. I must tell you, only last week I was asked to deal with a sexual harassment case with the same quid pro quo, the boss versus the woman, and we kind of dealt with it informally. And the woman accused the gentleman of sexual harassment, and his response was that she was sending him signals, mixed signals, right? And he was responding to those signals. And it turned out that she obviously she never realized that she didn't believe that she was sending those signals. And so we're able to informally work through it and get an understanding from both parties as to how to approach it.
Is this what you call kind of like a workplace dispute resolution situation where you come to the table and have that conversation? Boy, there's so much to talk about. Mixed signals, misunderstandings. Oh my goodness. This is just the first. Who is that now?
This is Kamala.
I've been waiting on you. There you are. Hi, Kamala. Go ahead.
As it relates to the question about data, statistics on the experience of our young boys and young men, I can't remember anything specifically off top of head, but I know when I was studying, we came across some research that was done here in Jamaica as it relates to age of first sexual contact. And I know that they were mindful to do it for both girls and boys.
Definitely need to look into that. And I'm speaking here from my own experiences, the conversations I've had across the country with thousands of young people. We have a lot of work to do, but definitely culture. I mean, sometimes you see how some young boys speak to some women, when they're walking on the road, and you can see it starting right there, and what kind of men they're going to become and how they're going to treat women. So it's a very scary future if we don't act now. So thank you all for contributing such insightful actions that we can take and things we need to review. I have the final two questions from Dwayne Smalling. Don't get upset with me, panelists, if I haven't read your question. I'm so sorry, we're running out of time. From Dwayne Smalling, two questions. First one, will there be penalties for institutions, organizations, employers, etc., that fail to reasonably act upon an allegation of sexual harassment? I think that's what I should say.
Georgia can take that, because there is.
Yes, there is. I was looking for the exact section. But yes, there are penalties for an employer or a tribunal who, having been made aware of sexual harassment happening in either the workplace or the institution, does nothing, right? I did say that in the presentation that you're supposed to take immediate and appropriate action.
It's $1 million fine.
When it comes to, which clause is that? Clause 37, I think.
No, there was about five or six. It's one of the early ones. About 5 or 6.
But it is there. I'm going to look for the exact wording and read it for Dwayne's benefit, but it is there, Empress.
Let me see if I can find it. One of the things that we probably also need to look at is a register for repeat sexual harassment offenders. I have come across a number of cases in which the anecdotal stories are that this person who is now being accused of sexual harassment on this occasion has a history. And whilst we can't take those into account because it has not been formally charged or dealt with, but there sometimes seems to be a pattern. Section 5.1 says an employer shall take immediate and appropriate action to deal with the sexual harassment of a worker of the employer, where the employer becomes aware of the sexual harassment. And 5.2 says an employer who fails to take immediate and appropriate action under subsection 1 shall be liable for the failure to act, and a worker who is aggrieved by the failure of the employer so to act may make a complaint in respect to the tribunal.
Right. So I don't think it doesn't make reference to the 1 million fine, and I'm not finding that kind of equity in the section, but you make the complaint to the tribunal and the tribunal rules accordingly.
Oh, yes, no, it's not. Yeah. Well, I suppose the tribunal will determine the fine. It's not for that.
All righty, thank you. This is an important, well, there are a couple, because Dwayne is asking, I'm going to read two. Dwayne is saying also, is the appointment of a sexual harassment workplace policy for both government and private sector mandatory or a recommendation?
I think I had answered that one, but
oh, you answered in the Q&A
or wherever he posted it, but I did respond that when it is passed, when the legislation is passed, it would be mandatory, whether government or private sector. The thinking is, and certainly what has been suggested, is that the ministry assists private sector organizations in crafting their policies. So just to have a template, and I did speak to in my presentation that there's a template in earlier versions, it's not in this version, and people have been calling for it to be placed back so that it could be used as a guide for organizations, institutions to craft their policy. But it will be mandatory for both government and private sector organizations.
And Georgette, your failure to provide a policy, if you're so requested by the authorizing officer, within a reasonable time, 30 days at minimum, that you could end up facing a fine of $1 million.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for sharing with us, Danny, Camilla, Georgette. It has been a, thought-provoking start of the change that is going to come. We are at the end of our virtual roundtable #1, and to all of you who tuned in today, thank you. You know, where 2 or 3 are gathered, change can come. We invite you to like our social media accounts at UN Jamaica, UNDP Jamaica, and UN Jamaica and UNDP Jamaica for updates on the next in this series. Special thanks to our panelists, Danny Roberts, Georgette Grant, and Camilla McWhinney. A big thank you as well to Denise E. Antonio, UNDP Resident Representative, and Novia McKay, Spotlight Initiative Jamaica Program Coordinator. So we're going to keep the conversation flowing. Remember this, 1 in 3 women worldwide experience physical and sexual abuse. 1 in 2 women are killed worldwide. In 2012, I think it was, they were killed by their partner or a family member. 1 in 5 women and girls have experienced physical and or sexual violence by an intimate partner within the last 12 months. As we respect and honor each other, we will lay the foundations for the elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls. My people, my people, my people, thank you for participating, my favorite P word. And remember to follow all public health protocols to keep safe during this COVID-19 pandemic, epidemic. But you know, it's a time for us to have more of these conversations while some of us are at home working in a nice, relaxing space. So when we do road again, we can end violence against women, children, and boys, and we can make sure that we have a sexual harassment-free country. Wear your mask, sanitize, wash your hands frequently, and keep at least a 6-foot distance from others. My people, 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet apart, all right? But let's keep working together. I thank you. I'm honored that I was asked to be a part of this conversation, and I will continue to be on the advocacy train with you. Walk good and listen, love to your families. And if any of you have children who are learning online, boy, I feel it for you. I'm going to go and check on my son now, who just finished his grade 3 class and just stepped in to let me know. I'm going to check on him. May your children be safe. May all the children of Jamaica be safe. May you be safe. May your families be healthy, wealthy, and wise. Thank you so much. And remember to just follow UNDP on social media for the next one. You don't want to miss it. Bless you all. Again, to our attendees, thank you for participating. Walk good.
And thank you, Empress, for being such an excellent host.
Thank you. I'm doing what I love, being with my people, bringing change.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all. And Kamala, I'll call you after this homeschool online thing is over. I may need some.
I'm here for you.
Again, when harassment happens, we know what we need to do. Walk good, everybody. Bless you.
Hello.
Police were called to the scene of another death arising from a domestic dispute. Killed his girlfriend 24 hours after her in custody. This time, after allegedly killing his wife in St. Mary's.
The Spotlight Initiative is a global multi-year partnership between the European Union and the United Nations to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls by 2030.
With a commitment of 500 million euros from the EU, Spotlight represents an unprecedented global effort and the largest of its kind to invest in gender equality and women's empowerment. Spotlight engages men and boys as equal agents of change. Engaging men and boys is a key piece of our efforts.
The objectives of Spotlight in Jamaica are to contribute to the reduction of family violence against women and girls, and to improve access for women and girls to essential, safe, adequate, integrated, gender-responsive services.